Welcome to the Deeks.ai podcast, where Wake Forest innovators unpack the real-world magic of artificial intelligence through candid conversations. I'm Michael Ferrari.
I'm Ryan Scholl.
Please join us as we explore how artificial intelligence is transforming work across campus, one fascinating story at a time.
At the Wake Forest School of Business, we are preparing students not simply to navigate the AI era, but to shape it. Because in a world transformed by intelligent systems, principled leadership matters more than ever. For today's students, AI literacy in business isn't optional. It is foundational to effective leadership. This reflects a reality that artificial intelligence in business is no longer experimental. It is operational. Join Executive Director of Experiential Learning and Innovation, Shannon McKeen, as we talk about the School of Business's award-winning all-in approach to integrating artificial intelligence.
What we want to do today was to highlight an award that the School of Business recently won, the 2026 Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business. Can we just say AACSB from now on?
Yes.
So they have a Global Impact Award for Teaching and Learning, which the Wake Forest School of Business won the 2026 version of that for integrating AI into business education. So Shannon, can you please explain that award a little bit?
Sure. So as you mentioned, AACSB, which is the accreditation organization for business schools, and I'm sure as your listeners know, any school needs to be accredited if they want to get federal funding, and it's a great signal for potential applicants. So it's a thing that we have to do. The university has its own accreditation organization called COC, which I cannot give you what that acronym stands for. But AACSB is a membership organization, and so they want to provide opportunities to recognize their members. So I'm pretty sure 2026 was the inaugural year for these impact awards, and they solicited nominations, and self-nominations were allowed in six categories: two in excellence of service, one for accreditation volunteers, and one for community leadership. More relevant for us, there was one on impactful leadership, one on research impact, one on societal impact, and one on teaching and learning excellence. So we had been doing this AI fluency thing for a couple of years, and I give credit to the marketing folks at the business school because I wasn't even aware that these awards were out there. And I got an email saying, hey, the work that's been done around AI fluency, we think it would be a good candidate for the Teaching and Learning Excellence Award. Would you be willing to put something together? And I said, sure. When's it due? It's like due in 4 days.
Yeah,
but
just like the students.
Yeah, exactly. Just like students, last minute. And so we pulled together, the self-nomination, and we were very surprised and pleased to have gotten recognized for that.
You won the 2026 award, which you said is the inaugural year, but I would suspect that it's not just a snapshot in time. I would suspect that this is sort of the body of work that you've done with AI. So what I'm curious about was the School of Business kind of went all in right when AI came out. What were those early days like, and why did you make that decision to jump into artificial intelligence?
So I think it was a grassroots effort. I think a couple of folks at the business school, John Montana, who you've had on the show,
Great guest,
myself, and information or a teaching technology person named Chris Shelton, recognized that, there's something going on out there. What should we do? This was, I think, in the spring of 2023. So yeah, ChatGPT had come out in November, and we started doing things. And it was Bailey we had a little bit of budget, so we offered lunch. And so we get people to come. And we started convening anybody who was interested, come hear what we're hearing or what we're thinking and share. And so I think that early phase, I think I called it we called it the exploration phase. What was going on? What were folks doing? And it was a combination of, hey, what did I read today? Or what did you read today? And how are you experimenting with it in the classroom? It got some traction. And then we realized that there was an education opportunity. So I think in maybe the fall of 23, we started doing a little more formal sessions, topical, trying to build AI fluency. In the early days, we didn't call it AI fluency. We just called it a help group more than anything else. And with all due respect to the university and the administration, as individuals, we could move more quickly. And so I think, and this worked out well, the university and the college, so the college and the business school were doing things about what's our policy, how we're going to do that, thinking very responsibly, because decisions they make would be long-term, where we were just kind of experimenting. So it worked out well. And I think that's one thing that gave us an edge, because it was grassroots. We were kind of doing what we could. We weren't breaking any rules, but it was whatever we wanted to do. And that led to great, I think, penetration. And as we mentioned in the application, we did a survey of staff, faculty, and students at the university in the fall of 2025. And 68% of faculty in the business school were using AI weekly or daily.
68%.
68%.
So that's over 2/3.
Over 2/3. And we did some research for the submission and learned that in the same time frame, nationally, the average was around 30%, and the numbers in the college was closer to 28%. So part of that's the nature of who's teaching in the business school, but I'd like to think the efforts we put underway had something to do with that.
You've moved at a blistering pace going forward with artificial intelligence. And so I would say that our business school is probably well above average, like you said, the number of percentage of users. I would also imagine that many schools are still struggling with adoption, recognizing that there are perspectives all over the spectrum, and they have their different beliefs and thoughts about artificial intelligence. How did you convince the academic leadership early on to almost allow you to do this experimentation and get behind you and support this effort? Because I would say a lot of other schools are probably struggling with that.
So I think so first of all, there are some members of the leadership who were coming to these sessions, these lunches, these training sessions, because they themselves were interested. So I think that was a great signal for others. And I think, at the end of the day, we weren't doing anything too revolutionary. It was just time investment. It wasn't costing anything except for lunch. So no one knew what to do. So okay, let's see what these guys can create and develop. But I think that is a challenge for larger places, because it seems like a big place to me, but we are relatively small compared to other business schools or other universities. So it's a little bit easier. There's already familiarity. So other staff and faculty knew John, knew Chris, knew me. So they saw an opportunity to come have lunch.
Do you think you had a unique advantage working in the business school environment versus other disciplines, perhaps?
Definitely. I think two advantages that I think we had. One is I'm a professor of the practice. And so this is a good thing, but I think because of my industry experience, I think of myself as having a bias for action, where I think in an academic setting, there's more of a bias for rigor, and you need that. But that was this idea of let's just try this, see what happens. There's not a lot of risk there. That was great. The other advantage that I have is that most of my teaching is in an experiential learning course. And so I'm not so much teaching certain discipline or certain skills or frameworks. I want people to apply them. And so I think it's much less threatening for students to use AI I like to say students should use the AI to stretch their capabilities, not shrink their effort. And so this could allow them to do more for their clients, to do more for the work. I have said I think I would struggle more if I were a computer science professor teaching entry-level programming, or I was a Spanish teacher teaching Spanish, just because that's so different. So we definitely had an advantage. And that plays out. If you look at other universities, business schools tend to be more use amongst faculty and staff than the college, whether it's at UNC, whether it's Duke, whether it's Dartmouth, some other schools I know pretty well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was speaking recently with some individuals from institution
a different institution, and they are just now starting to embrace artificial intelligence. And I think putting together, some courses and whatnot offered to students, and they were kind of struggling with whether or not those should be mandatory. So I was just curious your thoughts on that, because I myself am conflicted on whether or not that's something that should be mandatory.
It's a great question, Michael. So I'm old enough to know when early days of spreadsheets, it was Lotus 1, 2, 3 back then. No, it wasn't Excel, but early days of spreadsheet, business schools offer classes on spreadsheets. It seems ridiculous today that you'd offer a class on spreadsheet, unless it's some sort of boot camp for someone who, for some reason, has no exposure to it. So I think the end state will be the same for AI. I think in 5 years, I'll be surprised if there's any sort of entry-level AI class. Between now and 5 years from now, I do think to get everyone to the same level, whether it's optional or whether you can, opt out of it or test out, I don't know. But so I think long term this should not be, but in the near term there needs to be some way for those that are less certain or have no experience to get that experience.
But you don't have specific separate AI classes. You've built artificial intelligence into the curriculum, correct?
Yes, and that has been on a faculty to faculty basis. I think the leadership encourages it, but it's left to every faculty member to do what they want. And that was kind of our motivation when we started the AI fluency thing, because what I wanted to, if some faculty member doesn't want to use AI, that's their decision. But I wanted them to be informed so they could make a decision about whether it made sense for their area or not. I have a colleague, Kyer, who teaches
another great guest.
Yeah, who teaches a financial quant class, undergrads, and in one of his classes, the first, I forget what number, but first 5 or 6 sessions, it's all about basics of programming with Python. So he wants to make sure, at least that's what he told us, he wants to make sure that the students have fundamental understanding of coding in Python, but from then on, it's open, so for a free for all. You can, they have to do coding, but if they want to use AI to help them code, it's all for that. So it's again making sure the fundamentals. So he's integrated into his class, as have many other colleagues, but they've also done it in a way that I think protects the learning process, or tries to protect the learning process.
And there was something you said a minute ago that ties greatly into this quote I've heard around the business school, that faculty need to lead from knowledge, not fear. So just, you're saying you don't care whether they use it or not, but at least they're informed. So they have to be knowledgeable about it. And that's what eventually what became building AI fluency, morphed into, that they had the knowledge and then they could make the decision.
Exactly. Spot on.
The other point about that, and this is, I think I pulled this quote from the website: AI literacy in business is not optional. It is foundational to effective leadership. So this is not something that the students won't use. Like, once they get out into the real world, they will have to use artificial intelligence. So it's almost part of the DNA of a business school to prepare these students by teaching them artificial intelligence.
Yes. We have a market insights board for the MSBA program, which is the program I do most of my teaching in. And we had a meeting of that board recently, and the members there said exactly what you just said, Ryan, that they expect their incoming employees to be familiar with AI. And if they're not, they're going to quickly become familiar.
So what do employers tell you that they're looking for?
Liberal arts is making a comeback. They're looking for the critical thinking skills, which that's another topic, but AI worries me about making sure students maintain those critical thinking skills. But judgment skills, orchestration skills. We had one of the inside board members tell us that they haven't changed their number of hires, but what they're looking for, as opposed to core programming skills or core data analytics skills, it's more the coordination skills, the orchestration skills, the judgment skills, the communication skills, because they imagine these entry-level employees will be overseeing agents, doing some of the work that agents can do these days.
Again, you hit on a topic that Michael and I talked to a lot of our guests about, grappling with artificial intelligence in learning versus preparing students for their career. So we're recognizing that students have to understand how to use AI responsibly and correctly, but we don't want to, as you've pointed out, shortcut the efforts. So where do you find that balance?
I haven't found it yet. I'm still looking for it. I think the short answer is it's going to come down to assessments. And I think the day of, if your course is something that requires an exam, people joke about going back to blue books. Yes, but that's really hard to grade and really hard to scale. So I think what is going to happen is assessment is going to be more about the process, and so using AI, particularly if you've gotten past the foundational skills to more of the use cases of the tool, the technique, then, what prompt did you use? How did you respond to the prompt? Because I have no problem students using AI as long as they're using it as a thought partner and not as a shortcut. And so I don't know how you do that without somehow reviewing and assessing the process. But that's also time consuming, so who knows what's going to happen.
As our longtime listeners have heard me say many times, I don't think AI has broken education. I think it's exposed a lot of cracks in it.
Agree.
And it's unfortunately incumbent on our faculty to redesign that teaching and learning process for the society we're living in now. So
Totally agree.
The way you assess a student's mastery now is going to be different than giving them a multiple choice test or just writing an essay. And you can assess the process, or potentially a project or a conversation orally with the student to understand where their level of mastery is.
Totally agree. I had some students, so every year at the end, I asked students what advice they would have given themselves 10 months earlier when they started the program. And I've had students tell me they wish they'd used AI less because they recognize it. In a few cases, under pressure, they may have taken a shortcut. They didn't cheat, but they may have taken a shortcut that impeded their learning. And so how do we make it a place where that pressure is not so intense? And I don't know how the answer is, but that's something that I think it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, we spoke previously. I forget exactly with who, but the more I think about it, and I think about like my journey from being a student to working in the field, I still think when talking about, say, entry level jobs and whatnot, I think that there's room, exactly how Ryan said, with maybe this exposing some stuff about education, is kind of merging education with those entry level jobs in a way where I think AI can really offer some avenues for getting students to kind of simulate actually doing that job. So maybe they're entry level by title, but they're actually more familiar with what goes into that position.
Yes, totally agree. I think, back to your point, Ryan, about redesigning some of the exercises or some of the program in the programming in the course, you actually can improve the learning by using AI. An example I like to point to is that in the first semester this year, we tried for the first time, the MSBA students were given a data set around some financial transactions, and they were trying to identify fraud. And so they were going to build some models to do that. And a group of us got together, and this data set was integrated across all 5 courses that the students took in the fall. And so for each course, there was an assignment tied to this data set. And with the help of AI, what we were able to do is we were able to support this data set with kind of a traditional Harvard Business Review like case that described this scenario. And then, in addition to kind of that context for the data set, we were able to build a GPT with different personas of the characters that were in the case. So the chief risk officer and the chief revenue officer and the data scientist and the CEO. And so with a fairly simple GPT, they could, quote, interview each of these players and understand that what the chief risk officer cares about is different than what the chief revenue officer cares about. And how do you balance those different requirements or different metrics? Because the chief risk officer wants zero risk, and the chief revenue officer wants as much revenue as a safe level of risk would allow. And so that nuance, I think, made for a more real world project for them, mini project for them, as opposed to just some sort of clinical, here's the data, here's the risk profile, here's the percent likelihood of fraud.
Wake Forest, the business school especially, is different than many other business schools now. You've talked about the over 2/3 of professors using it daily or weekly. We started off by talking about the AACSB award. We've had business students on here talking about the way they are powering themselves up with AI. So there seems to be a different feel. And something else I've heard around there is, instead of focusing on the restrictions and limitations of AI, focusing on growing the students' capabilities, which you talk about often. Also, it seems like everything from grassroots to leadership is really allowing the faculty to experiment and try things. So there isn't this cloud of how do we stop AI, or how do we defeat it. It's about student motivation. But I think the students who go into the business school are very highly motivated to learn. I mean, they intentionally come to the business school, so they want to learn. So I think the student motivation coupled with the ability for the faculty to experiment and try new things, I think those are two things that have really propelled the business school. What else has really made it different and separated it from other business schools around?
So two things. Well, this first thing may not separate it from other business schools, but, and you mentioned this earlier, Ryan, the market demands. So we like to think we're close to the market from a faculty and staff standpoint. Students are definitely close to the market because they're out there looking for jobs. So I think that kind of gives us, one of the things I've taught some classes in change management, and it's really easier to affect change in an organization if there's some sense of urgency, some sort of external pressure that's forcing people to change. I was talking to a colleague back in like 2010. I was part of a experiment at Haynes looking at the feasibility of work from home. It didn't go anywhere. Fast forward to April of 2020, and like everyone's working from home, and so it was easy to make change when that was happening. So again, that external force of the market asking for it. And the other thing I think, which is helpful, is Wake Forest's motto, Pro Humanitate, because I think the university as well as the business school is putting a real spin on that and thinking about AI used responsibly, for humanity, but also using it for your own self to make sure you're using it in a way that's going to, go back to the quote, stretch capabilities, not shrink your effort. I teach a class called Analytics and Society, which is basically an ethics class. And I taught it before. So I guess 3 years ago when I taught it, AI was just something that we were thinking about. It wasn't that prevalent. But now almost everything we talk about is AI. And the students are so engaged because they see some of the threats that AI may pose for them in their job search, but they also recognize the issues with bias in the data, bias in the training, misuse of it. So I think that also makes it very topical and makes folks want to learn more about AI in our business school here at Wake Forest.
So I want to dive a little deeper into that. You just mentioned the students. You talked about students getting excited about it. You've also mentioned students saying they wish they used it less. And you also have students that come from other disciplines that either transition into business or just take a couple business courses. The students who are more cautious about it, how do you bring them on board with what the business school is trying to do?
So I hope what's happening in all the classes is that, kind of like AI fluency for faculty, is it's a force in society right now. So you need to understand it. If you choose not to because you're very worried about biased training data, or you're very worried about the impact on learning, or you're very worried about the environment, those are all legitimate concerns. And that's a whole other conversation. I'm not sure. I'm not one of those folks who think AI is going to solve all those problems, so we don't have to worry about those problems. I think AI is going to help, but those problems need to be solved. The other thing I think, and maybe it's because of the passage of time, is that I find so 3 years ago, a higher percentage of students were, boycotting AI. I'm not going to use AI. I don't want to use AI. Now there's very few that are like that. I think their concerns may not have changed, but they've either, because by now, most of them may have been exposed to AI back in high school. And so they've they're AI natives, so to speak. I heard this term the other day. I'm not sure they're quite AI natives, but they're closer to AI natives than you and I are.
Yeah.
And so they've just recognized they can't. It's not a choice. So whether they were forced into it or they just evolved, I don't know. But again, it's giving people the choice, the option. Just make sure they're informed, so they're making an informed decision.
As a follow-up to that, what challenges do you see about this all-in approach that specifically our business school has taken?
So I guess I see two that come to mind. One is this impact on learning. I think that, and Kai is a good example. He mentioned we had one of our AI fluency meetings on Friday, and he was talking about how he's using AI in that particular course. And he made the point about the first 6 or 9, whatever sessions, they can't use AI. And so how do you police that? And he says, I really can't. I explain why. I think you're going to get plenty of chance to use AI. It's coming. But for these first sessions, it's really important for you and for me that you know and understand the basics. So giving the students an explanation, the why, and then trusting the honor code to do it. But again, the more we talk about using AI, it's harder to enforce it for the times they can't use AI. And so, how do we? It's interesting. This was a year ago, but one of my colleagues had all these assignments due during the semester, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't care if you use AI or not, but you won't be able to use it on the exam." And too many students, he told, either weren't paying attention and weren't listening or weren't thinking ahead. And so, they were, these homeworks are easy. I'm getting these done all the time. Boom, I'm getting all A's. And then the exam, which is 40% of the grade, they're like, they have no idea what to do because they had fallen prey to this idea of, I'm going to use it as a shortcut, not as a way to increase the capabilities. So maybe it's examples like that may be something to worry about. The other thing, what happens if this is a bubble and AI all of a sudden the cost of using it goes way up? There's no longer a free version. Everyone's got to pay. So there could be some external constraints that come in, but business will face that too. What do you do when that happens? So that's a little bit of worry I have, is what happens if regulation or economics or other concerns put some sort of issue. This Mythos, I'm sure you read about Mythos and all these vulnerabilities.
Which is the new model from Anthropic.
Thank you. Right. Thank you. I forget we have an audience here. Yeah. So, and the thing about the Anthropic model is that they're not releasing it yet to the general public because it's so good at finding vulnerabilities in software. A factoid that I heard the other day is that in the cybersecurity industry as a whole in 2025, I think there were like 6,000 vulnerabilities identified in some mainstream software tools. In like 7 weeks, this year, Mythos found another 2,000. So they found a third as many in the whole year, the whole industry as they did. So that put concerns. But I thought about Mythos because this is back to what sort of risks AI are creating and how it might impede what we're doing in the business school. Canvas went down a couple of days ago. It was a hack. I have no idea if it was connected to some AI finding vulnerabilities, but it may very well have been. And that was during grading, and so students were up in arms about that. And so at least it was patched, and then there was some sort of talk of it was going to be a planned attack on the 12th. No, yeah, today. So I should check Canvas.
Yeah, right.
So that AI itself could be a impediment to our advancing AI. Who knows?
Interesting.
And I am predicting a massive spike in vulnerabilities being found through all these, would-be vibe coders or whatever, actually shipping software and stuff like that they probably honestly have no idea what's going on. So that's my prediction is that number shoots through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, it's been years since I did any real coding, although I was a computer science major as an undergrad, back when it was Fortran. But what I read is that vibe coding's great, but the code is not that efficient. It's not that effective. And so
Exactly.
that goes back to where,
Can everybody code? Yes.
yes,
Should they code? No.
exactly.
And I'm pretty sure Michael's taking some shots at me right here because I say how I'm pumping out all this software and I have no business releasing any of it. Thank
No,
goodness
but
I use it only for myself. But
no, but see, that's different though. Like what you're doing is way different. I think there's gonna be somebody who's like, hey, I do, XYZ. I made this program that could do it for you. And then they don't realize that they're, selling something where now it opens up this massive vulnerability. Like what you're doing, I think is different. Like if it's something that's like pretty low risk, you're just mostly using it for yourself. I'm cool with that. I think that's awesome.
thank you.
To that point, I think there's an article in, I think it was the New York Times within the last 2 months about this company called Medvec, I guess. And the headline was, the first $1 billion valued company with one employee.
Yeah.
So two things jumped out at me. First of all, according to the article, he started hiring people because he was lonely. But the second thing was a perfect example of, product market fit, where the service he was offering was in such demand that he could put out some not very good tools that people would embrace. My favorite one was, for some reason, one of his agents kept insisting on sending lasagna recipes to his customers. And like, that's random, but anyways, yeah. So I think you're right, Michael. It's gonna be a lot of questionable code that's out there in software.
Well, a follow up to that, which is I'd encourage people to research that story, because what was interesting was you talk about the demand. He used AI to actually create artificial demand. So not only did he make his company, but he used AI to create fake Facebook accounts, which created artificial demand for that. Which again, right? You use it for the good and the bad.
Yeah, there's some JP Morgan sued somebody who, this was years ago. She sold him. She started a business that was a legitimate business, but she used some fake accounts to make it look bigger, and she ended up getting sued and ended up going to jail. So yeah, I don't think the New York Times. I think it was the New York Times. I'm not sure that was their best reporting, because it was a great hook, but behind the scenes, it wasn't quite the company that. But I guess it was valued, so they probably stand by their original point.
Okay, so let's bring this back to our business school.
Yes.
The Wake Forest School of Business has been a model, highlighted by this award, a model of integrating artificial intelligence into the teaching and learning landscape. You've touched on many of the points, but what can other schools do to get to where Wake Forest is? Is it a grassroots thing? Does it have to be top-down leadership? What are some of the quick first steps they can do?
So I think back to the idea of rigor versus action and a bias. If you're in a business school somewhere, don't wait. Start experimenting, and hopefully you already are. And I think one of the things that this Fluency initiative has taught me is that there's probably a lot more going on than we realize. So convening these groups in part was just a way to normalize that experimentation. So people felt comfortable talking about where they'd tried something and it hadn't worked. Where they'd use AI for this thing and, oh my God, that was a mistake. So it made it. I think there's still some hesitancy on some people's parts to talk too much about how they're using AI, because maybe they'll be perceived as taking shortcuts, taking an easy way out. I think students are uncertain about what's going to be allowed versus what's not allowed. And so I think, again, it created an environment where it was safe to talk about AI. So share what you're doing, talk to people, find colleagues. There's, you probably both on it. There's a Google group list at the university, and there's one for the business school. I wish it was used more, but again, it's out there. People are definitely reading a lot of what's going on because they hear about it. I wish there was more sharing. One of the things that we're trying to think about for the next step for AI fluency is how do we, what is the next step? How do we, make sure we're providing opportunities for those that may still be reticent to, maybe they're part of the laggards in the diffusion of innovation curve, but also keep those coming back that are maybe closer to the front of the majority or the early
Maybe they
majority.
should listen to a podcast about higher education, artificial intelligence.
Totally right. You know, it's
Yeah,
funny.
I'll let you know if I find one.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask you guys. No, I think I even mentioned this podcast in the award
You did. Thank you very
it's
much.
Oh, wow.
you know, I think,
Appreciated the call out.
the work that's happening, you know, and just again spreading the word, making it comfortable, and bringing on, you know, faculty and staff and students and alumni just helps spread the word.
Yeah, I think from my viewpoint too, I think something that I found was fascinating is the institution I was speaking about earlier, where they're starting to embrace AI a bit more. I know that they've had a lot of discussions with like in certain departments, say like for instance, they're speaking to accounting firms and kind of getting a bit of an idea about like what their new hires, like what's going on with them, if they're, you know, their interns that they bring on every year, like what's the kind of pulse there. And it's kind of been this awesome, like both helping each other, because AI in particular, there's like they just were talking about like speaking with this firm, like they just had their first group of interns that were actively using in their, you know, accounting internship artificial intelligence tools. So exactly like you were saying, like communicating and like building bridges and stuff, I think is huge.
We're, you know, I think what we're trying to do at the business school is make sure our students are like those interns you mentioned, Michael. So they go in and, you know, a lot of folks, when we think about AI, and this is something that's true of our market insights board, is they tend to be in tech industries or very tech advanced industries. But a lot of our employees, excuse me, a lot of our students, graduates, are going to go to smaller size firms, maybe firms in industries where AI is still kind of a new thing, and they're going to have the opportunity to kind of be the people that management looks to. Can we do this? Should we do this? How do we do this? Now, there'll be hopefully plenty of students that are going to go to JP Morgan's or the Metas of the world, where, you know, they'll be learning from their management, but it could be the flip side. Which, what a great opportunity if you're 25 or 24 or 23 and you go and all of a sudden people are looking to you as the expert.
Yeah. And if you can go to one of those smaller, you know, those smaller places and you're pretty, you know, well versed in AI and you're going in there capable of maybe the output of multiple at your position, you could help build that and create the next one or what have you.
Yeah. So you mentioned accounting firms. One of the things that two colleagues and I are looking at is thinking longer term. So I started my career in a consulting firm, and like most professional service firms, consulting firms, when I started, the organizational structure was a pyramid. You know, you hire a bunch of people at the bottom, and through almost an apprenticeship method, they learn the business, they learn client management, and 10 years later, some of them are a partner. If they're not hiring as many entry level people, who's going to be a partner in 10 years? You know, how does an organization plan for that long term? And so we don't have an answer yet, but we hope to have one soon. So
You have to come back and tell us,
right,
you know, when you figure that out.
exactly.
Yeah.
Is there any other advice you'd specifically like to give to our listeners?
At the risk of repeating myself, be curious. One of the things that I'm a little, so I just read this paper from OpenAI, the parent company of ChatGPT, this term capability overhang. Have you heard that term, capability overhang? As you may. So there's this idea that the capabilities of AI is moving so fast, and humans, we don't like change, you know, and so there's some power users that, based on their analysis, are fully utilizing all the capabilities that, in their case, ChatGPT offers. But most of us are not, and that overhang could probably grow in the near term. So, just because, even if you think you're understand AI and are using it to its capabilities, probably you're not. So continue to be curious, continue to try.
You mentioned OpenAI, but Anthropic put out a fantastic graph, very visual representation of that exact thing, where they have all the different industries broken out and what the capabilities of AI are versus what the usage in AI is.
I'm going to look that up. Is that on their blog pretty much? Or
it's on our Raindrop page.
Okay. I'll check it out. Excellent.
Well, Shannon, Wake Forest has been a national model in many different areas over the years. We are a small school, but we are mighty, and we have been placed on the map in different disciplines. And right now, we are definitely leading the way in integrating artificial intelligence into teaching and learning. And the business school is definitely a model for that. So even though it is a team effort, we know there's a lot of people involved. We want to thank you, and I know Wake Forest wants to thank you. So thank you very much.
It's been fun. It's a pleasure. And I'm always looking forward to what comes next. It's great. Very much. Very cool.
Thanks again to our guest, and thanks for listening to the Deeks.ai podcast. Please continue to follow the AI discussion by subscribing on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. If you have any comments, questions, or would like to join the discussion, please email us at deeks.ai@wfu.edu.